Prose, and I'd like to welcome you to P&P Live. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format in the midst of these continuously extraordinary times. Throughout all of these times, we strive to continue to bring you the authors you love and their new books to our politics and prose community. At any point during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase tonight's book, Fearlessly Different, on the Politics and Prose website. We also have a link to our moderator, Emily Ladau's book, in the same chat. Additionally, you can ask the author a question by clicking on Q&A, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. And while we try to get to everyone's questions, we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. At this point, I'd also like to thank Joyful Signing for providing ASL interpretation for this event. We're also providing closed captions to help you follow the discussion. Just enable the CC link right next to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we want to thank you for being here with us today. We're so thankful to our family of loyal customers who kept our business and our spirits afloat. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Mickey Rowe is the author of Fearlessly Different, an autistic actor's journey to Broadway's biggest stage. Mickey is an actor, director, consultant, and public speaker who's highly sought after both nationally and internationally. He was the first autistic actor to play Christopher Boone, the lead role in the Tony Award-winning play, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. He's also appeared in the title role in the Tony Award-winning play, Amadeus, and more. Mickey was also the founding artistic director of National Disability Theater. Mickey will be in conversation tonight with Emily Ladau, a passionate disability rights activist, writer, storyteller, and digital communications consultant. She's the author of Demystifying Disability, What to Know, What to Say, and How to Be an Ally. Emily also co-hosts the Accessible Stall podcast, a show that dives into disability issues. Please welcome Mickey Rowe and Emily Ladau to P&P Live.
Hello, thank you so much for having us. It is such an honor to be here today. And Emily, thank you so much for joining me at this event. It's truly such an honor to get to be doing this event with you.
Mickey, thank you so much. I have so many questions for you. I am so excited to dive in to talk, but first, should we introduce ourselves?
Absolutely.
Should I stop with the intro or do you want to get started?
Either one, I can go first. My name's Mickey Rowe. My pronouns are he, him. And if you are blind or low vision, please know that I'm a white man with brown kind of swept hair. I have glasses on and a gray blazer. And right now I'm in this very rustic looking little Airbnb as my kids are on spring break right now. And we tried to do a little getaway.
And I am Emily Ladau. I am a white woman with brown curly hair pulled to the side in a ponytail. I've got big round glasses on and I'm wearing a teal colored shirt. There's a hotel in the background and my pronouns are she, her. And just a little fun fact, I am in a hotel in DC right now. So I am so close to politics and prose compared to where I usually am in the world. It's so funny.
That is so awesome. What are you doing in DC right now?
Honestly, just taking a little bit of a break from life. I mean, everybody needs a little bit of a break once in a while.
Absolutely.
So let's get to it. I am so excited to be in conversation with you. I love your book. I think that it is a really powerful story. And I personally, and honestly, selfishly, wrote these questions with my own interest in mind because I was like, I want to know all of this stuff. So I'm just going to ask Mickey what I want to know and hope that everybody else wants to.
That's so sweet of you to say.
So I'm really excited to start this conversation. And my first question for you is, how did Fearlessly Different come to life? What led you to write it? I think so often as authors, there's a beautiful backstory, but people don't always get the backstory of why we thought we wanted to share our story with the world. So tell me, what was that like for you? How was your book baby born?
Yeah, so I think there are two reasons, and I'll give both of them. There's like the idyllic, put it on the back of a postcard reason, and then there's the other reason. So I think the first reason is that I was feeling really deeply frustrated and sad that I was seeing at the time that I started writing this, which was, I guess, 2.5, 3 years ago now. I was seeing so many stories about disability everywhere, so many novels about disability, and none of them that were getting mass attention were written from people within the disability community, or with even a lot of research done into communicating with folks who are disabled. A lot of the stories that I was reading maybe made disabled people feel shame around being disabled, or made them feel like their differences were something to be ashamed of or make them feel bullied about. And I really wanted to write a book that was going to show people that, look, if you are different, if you access the world differently, the world needs you. Your differences truly are your strengths. And that when we share all of ourselves with the world, we are giving the world such a huge gift. I wanted to write a book that was going to help young people with disabilities and parents of young people with disabilities know that disability is not something we need to feel shame around, that we can be so prideful in our identities. And also, I was trying to figure out why, because there's so much brilliant writing about disability. You've done so much brilliant writing about disability. And I was trying to figure out how, with all this wealth of knowledge and resources, how problematic stories and stories written from people who weren't in our community were still getting such traction. And so I thought, you know what, maybe the small piece I can play in this, if I can play one small piece. I'm a storyteller, I do theater, I tell stories and create stories on stage. So maybe if instead of trying to write an academic book, when there are so many people who can do that so much more brilliantly than I can, like you and others, if I try to write a story, then maybe I can get a different audience, give them a foot in the door to the disability conversation, give them a foot in the door to my lived experience by trying to just tell a story that's going to captivate them. I think the other thing that was happening at the time is, when I started writing this book, and for much of the process, even through publishing, I was working a minimum wage job, bagging groceries, and I have a family with 4 kids and a wife, and that just wasn't really working. So I had to try to figure out, how can I better support my family? How can I better love on my family? What are the stepping stones that I can start to take now to hopefully make a better future for my family in the future? And I thought maybe writing a book with my story would help me get out of the bagging groceries line of work. Did that answer your question? Did that make sense at all?
It made so much sense. And it also gives me this profound respect for how you went about this process, because I recognize that maybe from the outside, people glamorize the book writing process a little bit, and they think that, you write a book and that's it, get a check and you're set for life. And that's not how publishing works, especially not for minority groups. And so the fact that this for you was part of a broader effort to find a way to support yourself and your family, but also that you're saying, yeah, I bagged groceries, I'm making an honest living, and I'm also trying to find my way doing things I'm passionate about. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that adds so much to what goes into the process.
Yeah, and I think it's such a common experience too for people with disabilities. It's estimated that up to 85% of college graduates on the autism spectrum are unemployed. And then, as you know, even if we can get a job, even if we are employed, minimum wage is still not a guarantee in exchange for employment for so many folks with disabilities. I couldn't get a job all through college. I was stilt walking, street performing, busking on the street with a hat out to try to make ends meet as a single dad. So I think it is so common for disabled folks to have to really work really hard to think of out of the box ways to get employment sometimes.
I'm glad you brought that statistic up. And I think that's something we should be keeping in mind as we are having this broader conversation, recognizing that there's an interplay between your story and between the broader disability experience. And I want to go back to your story for a moment, because I think every person who writes a book has a very unique process in doing so. They all go about it in their own way. So before we dive more into the meat of the book, the contents of the book, what was your writing process like? How did you go about putting the book together?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I am legally blind, which means that I can read 18-point font slowly. I'm not the best at it, but I read large print font. But when I'm writing or texting or doing things like that, I use voice to text most of the time. So my writing process was really me going on long, long walks around my neighborhood, just thinking and almost talking the book into my phone. And I would just say things as I thought of them, not necessarily in order. And then open up that Word document when I got home and sort of shuffle around the pieces and try to figure out what this story was. I made a really clear outline right at the beginning of writing the book. I think because it's a memoir and because I kind of had it in the back of my mind for a while that at some point maybe it makes sense to write a memoir, the outline was really easy to come up with, and I had a really clear outline. So then it was just picking a piece on that outline and flushing it out with my voice to text.
I love that. And it really does show that everybody has a different process, because when I was writing, it was very much a chair in the corner of my living room, handwritten furiously into a notebook, late night notes on my phone when I should have been sleeping and I was up jotting things down. But I love that you wrote so much of it just from voice to text on long walks. And it shows that there's more than one way to do things.
Absolutely. And so many different equal options that using voice to text is an equal option, communication option, as writing in a notebook in the corner, as is using maybe an AAC device. There's an awesome book called The Reason I Jump by Naoki. I'm forgetting his last name now. Naoki H. wrote The Reason I Jump. And he's a non-speaking autistic person who I believe uses AAC device. There are so many ways that we can communicate, and they're all so equally valid.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I've not read the book, but I did watch the associated documentary goes along with the book. And it's a reminder that we cannot value one form of communication over the other, and that all of them are equally valid ways of telling a story.
Yeah.
So I love that. And I want to ask, and you talked about this being a memoir, and you quite literally in many ways spoke it into existence by speaking into voice to text. But because it's something so deeply personal, would you say that there were parts of the book that you found really challenging to write? And if so, I'd love for you to talk more about how you worked through that process.
Absolutely. So I think in many ways, since I'm autistic, and so when you're autistic, trying to go out in public and communicate with people or build relationships with people, so often it's a feeling of try to build a relationship and have it fail, or try to make human connection and have it fail over and over and over again. So I kind of feel like every single day when I go out into the world, I am so vulnerable and being so vulnerable. So because of that, being vulnerable in a book feels really, or on stage or in a story, feels so easy to me. So it almost felt less vulnerable to be able to write down my vulnerable personal stories in a book where I had full control than it did to meet someone at a coffee shop and have coffee with them. And that feels more vulnerable to me than writing a really deeply personal book. And also, I think sometimes autistic people like me, we don't understand the social rules as to why someone might feel uncomfortable speaking something. We just speak what is true and speak what we think. And sometimes I think non-autistic people say, well, here's what I want to say, but I know I can't actually say it because it goes against maybe social rules that exist. And as an autistic person, I don't see those social rules. I just I don't even know they exist sometimes. So I don't feel vulnerable or scared when I'm breaking them because I didn't know there was a rule there to break to begin with. But the parts of the book that felt the hardest to write about, there's a time in the book when I need to make a really big decision about my living situation. I'm living with my wife at the time and my kids, and something starts happening in the house where the house becomes an unsafe place for my kids. I think, a lot of autistic people, myself included, are so much more prone to and so much more likely that people with disabilities can be in abusive relationships and abusive situations. And that was definitely true for myself. And I dealt with that for a lot of years, but there's a point in the book where that situation turns from me toward my kids. And I had to make a really hard decision about leaving the house and we talked about how hard it is just to survive as any kind of parent or human being with a disability in terms of finances, not having access to minimum wage like everyone else, the unemployment rates. But I had to make a really scary decision to then become a single dad with full custody of my kids, going to visit the kids' mom had supervised visitations where she would visit them with a social worker helping her to visit the kids at the time, or not helping her, but just helping to keep the kids safe while they visited her. And that was a really hard for me to write about because I was trying to I still don't really understand everything that was happening at that situation. I think it will probably take decades for me to unpack that and come to peace with that. It is such a hard situation for any parent to wrap their heads around someone else who they cared about and used to care about, doing something so difficult and challenging to their children. So I think for that reason, that was super challenging. And I really kept putting it off. I kept putting that part of the book off until finally my agent and editor said, you really need to just flush this out more. And so then I decided the best way I can do it justice while being fair to everyone in the book as best as I can, and trying not to put judgment on anyone as best as I can, would be if I just make a list of things that happened. So that's what ended up in the book. But it was really challenging. And I think the thing that finally helped me was realizing, you know what? I can never understand maybe or guess why someone might do something in a situation or why they might have felt a certain way. And that's not my job. I don't need to understand or know. All I need to write about is my lived experience. I don't need to speak for my children. I don't need to speak for anyone else I've lived with before. I only need to speak for myself. So focusing on, this is how I felt. This is why I was confused. This was the decision I needed to make. Made that part of the book feel more doable, more approachable for me to write, and also made it feel more ethical for me to write it because I didn't have to make presumptions about other people or their feelings. I just could write about myself in the situation.
I thought that list format that you used, the bullet points, was such an interesting approach and gave me a lot of insight into how your mind works and allowed me to follow your journey in a way that made sense through your lens. And I really appreciated that. I've not seen a story told in that particular style in a memoir in maybe ever. And I think what I liked so much about it was that you took something that was difficult and you said, I am going to do what works for me. I am going to write this in a way that is accessible to me. And I am going to do it in a way that I can present it so that I am comfortable and you understand it. And I really liked that a lot. And I can appreciate that that must have been challenging. I also want to celebrate some of the more rewarding moments of writing a book too, because although there were very difficult things that you talked about, there was also a lot of joy. So tell me, what was most rewarding to you?
The moments I loved writing about the most were I loved writing about stilt walking, even as a young person, as a kid, stilt walking at fairs and festivals with a hat out and street performing. It was such a visceral experience for me. It was such a joyful, incredible experience for me, and such a sensory experience for me. So trying to write about what it feels like to stilt walk and street perform for people who maybe have never done it before was super rewarding to me. I think also because it was one of the times when I felt the best. Often, I'm sure you can relate to this as well. Often it's people with disabilities. Sometimes I think people just feel uncomfortable around us, and I don't always know why, but they make it really evident that they feel slightly uncomfortable around us. So that was my experience all the time, especially when I was younger, more so than now. But when I was stilt walking or street performing, everyone who saw me smiled, and it just felt so incredible and so right. So that was really great. I also loved writing about my grandma. I loved writing about her so much. She passed away, but I felt like I kind of got to magic her back into existence when I wrote the book a little bit. My grandparents lived on the beach and basically raised me, and they did so much to allow me to feel free and brave and independent. They lived on the beach and they built a pirate ship for me that was like a wooden raft that I would go out on. And often they would be brave enough to let me, and they would trust me enough to let me go out on the beach all by myself, exploring the beach, being on this raft without their supervision, which I think a lot of parents, I know I would feel a little scared allowing my 6-year-old or 5-year-old to go out on Puget Sound on their own unsupervised. But the fact that they allowed me to be unsupervised on the beach and explore by myself meant so much to me. And it was so exciting and joyful getting to write about that experience of just being in the salty air, experiencing all the sea life in Puget Sound and the Pacific Northwest, and being on the water.
I love that you got to relive such a positive relationship through the writing of the book. And I think that's such a valuable part of the writing process. And, you know, when you mentioned the little pirate ship, I don't know, maybe was that some foreshadowing for meeting your future wife?
I think so. We talk about that. It was so full circle. A funny story that she tells all the time that I didn't even realize, but my wife, I guess, she was asking me all the time if I wanted to do play dates with her and her kids. I was a single dad. She was a single mom, and she kept asking if we would do play dates together. And just my autistic brain, as I said, going to meet someone at a coffee shop is so much more vulnerable and intimidating to me than writing a memoir. So she would ask me if I wanted to hang out with her, and I would say yes. And then I would ghost her and just not actually respond with any details about when or where or making it happen. But she was the general manager of this charter boat company that takes people out on a pirate ship and gives people like a pirate adventure out in Seattle on a pirate ship, a real one, like a 50-foot long pirate ship. And I think she knew that the pirates were kind of like a special interest of mine. So at one point, when I think she was fed up with continuing to be ghosted by me, she said, "Hey, do you and your kids want to ride the pirate ship? I have some free tickets." I said yes. And she said, "Great, I also have the day off, so I'm going to be there too with my kids. Can't wait." And we hung out, and the rest the rest is history. But it was, yes, absolutely. So full circle, so incredible. And what's also interesting is when I was with my wife for the first time, when I was with Helen, after we met on that pirate ship, you know, that was one of the first times since my grandma passed that I really felt love in that way, that I felt what relationships or love is supposed to feel like. And you would think it would be such a happy, incredible experience to finally have that. But for some reason, since that was maybe the first time in decades that I'd actually been safe to think about my feelings and process my feelings, it was actually such an experience. I felt like I had to do so much mourning almost when I met my wife and realized, oh, this is what love is. And this is what safety feels like, to realize that was not what I'd experienced for the last many decades, even though it's what I should have probably gotten to experience.
I just love the story of you and Helen, and that brought me a lot of joy to read. And, you know, I almost just want to sit here and listen to your love story all day, to be quite but I also want to make sure that we talk a little bit more about some of the disability topics that you brought up. And I wanted to note overall that you did such a good job of interweaving your story with broader disability information. So how did you manage to strike that balance of telling your personal story while also taking a step back and saying, okay, here's the broader issue that I want you to understand?
Yeah, I feel like when I was writing this book, it almost felt like I knew that my job in writing this book was to build a Trojan horse in a sort of way. Because I just thought there's so much about the disability community that everyone needs to know. And I was just, again, feeling so frustrated that people were not talking about the disability community 2.5, 3 years ago. I feel like so much more people are talking about it so much more now, thanks to your book and others, than they were 2.5 or 3 years ago. But they really weren't talking about the disability community at all. I know even I would try to, when theaters or different communities were talking about the need for diversity, inclusion, and equity, anytime I tried to say, don't forget the disability community, people would tell me to go be like, no, that's not what this is. That's not what diversity is. That's not what equity is. That's not what inclusion is about. So I felt such an intense need really a burning desire to get this information about the disability community out into the public in a different way, in a larger way. And I thought the only way people are going to accept this information is if I can feed it to them by way of a Trojan horse. So I thought the best way I could do that is just write the best story I possibly can. Write a really deeply personal story, write a story that people can connect with, whether they're disabled or not, people can hopefully connect with it, and write a story that is going to maybe be easy for them to connect with in the beginning, easy for them to jump into in the beginning. And then by way of this story, subtly feed them and hide these other really burningly important things that I thought they needed to know in that. If that makes any sense at all. So I think the way I was able to do it, and the reason I did it, is because it was so intentional that I really felt like I was building a Trojan horse, the horse being this story, a good story that people would connect with and want to read. And hidden inside the story is things people really, really need to know about disability community.
It's the sneak attack. You get them right where you want them.
Yeah.
I like that approach. But I have a question for you. And you and I talked about this a little bit just as we were discussing your story before we had our conversation tonight.
Yeah.
How do you balance the fact that at the beginning you are painting this picture of a little bit of a feel-good story, a little bit oh, I'm an inspiration and
Yeah.
I made it in the world. And then you get to the end or not even the end, but you start to gradually build momentum until it's like, we live in an ableist society and, I'm being painted inspiring because I'm disabled, but actually, let me tell you what's really going on in the world. So
yeah,
how do you balance that?
That is such a good question. I think you definitely understand as a disabled author that, and this is also something I experienced when I was at National Disability Theater, trying to get large theaters to sign on to letting disabled folks take over the reins of their organization for a production. People really, and publishers also really feel the need, if you're telling a story about because let me restart over, I apologize. Because so many of the stories that we've seen about autism, I think about Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I think about The Good Doctor on TV, or Rain Man, or even Atypical. So many of these stories have been written by non-autistic people. And so many of these stories at times feel really kind of ableist tropes a little bit of this white male, what's the word when someone is a genius, autistic?
Savant.
Yes, savant, thank you, right. Yeah, I feel like all of these stories, right? It's a white male autistic savant, right? And they're all written by fictional stories written by non-autistic people. But because of that, that's what publishers know. They're like, oh, this is what a story about autism is supposed to look like. This is what a story about disability, I think about Wonder or You Before Me or My Left Foot. This is what a story about disability is supposed to feel like and be like. So it's really hard to get people to buy a book or agree to produce a story that fits nowhere in that picture that they expect. I thought even writing the book, there are so many people reading my book. I hope there will be many people reading my book where it may be their first touch point with disability, where they've never thought about disability before. They've never knowingly connected with the disability community before. And so I felt really strongly like, okay, again, with the little Trojan horse image, if I'm going to do this, the best way I can do this is meet the reader, meet the publisher, meet the producer, whoever it is, meet them where they're at. Let me understand where they're at, what they feel comfortable with in this moment, and let me try to meet them there. I'm going to meet them where they feel comfortable, and I'm going to hold their hand. And then once I've met them where they're at, once I've met them where they feel comfortable, even if they think what they want is inspiration story, or whatever it is they think they want. I'm going to try to meet them where they're at, meet them where they feel comfortable, and then figure out how quickly we can run over to that wall, which is where I want us to end up, which is, social model of disability and all this good stuff, right? So I felt in my book, I tried to write it in the way, I feel like also in the beginning, there was just so much information about autism. I kind of had to give people so that they could keep up with the story or understand what was happening. But I felt like I had to meet them where they were at with the maybe tropes that they felt comfortable with, hold their hand, and then try to walk or slowly pull or attempt or guide them in the direction I wanted to end up, to where hopefully by the end of the book, they have a totally new perspective on disability than what they started the book with.
I respect that so deeply. And it's a similar approach that I try to take of offering that olive branch and bridging that gap and saying, I'm going to meet you where you are, but then you need to come along with me on the rest of the journey. So
yes.
I love that approach. And I think that's incredibly valuable. And I am wondering, what other works might you suggest people look to see similar approaches that you take, where it's actual autistic representation? Because you talk about the importance of storytelling, and you talk about the importance of, bringing people into the conversation. Where else can people look to get authentic stories of the autistic experience?
Yeah, I really love Kiss Quotient by Helen Hong, which is, she's an autistic author, and she wrote an awesome, it's like a rom-com, sexy rom-com with an autistic lead woman, which I really love. Again, I really, really love The Reason I Jump by Naoki Higashida, because I think it's so important. People so often, I was non-speaking when I was younger, and people so often assume non-speaking people are stupid, or non-speaking people can't communicate, or non-speaking people don't have agency and cannot advocate for themselves. And I love that we can show people that that's just not true, that there are so many different valid forms of communication. So that's why I really love Naoki's book. I also really like Secret Life of a Black Aspie by Anand Prahlad, which, and for those of you who are watching who don't know, Aspie is short for Asperger's, which was a previous diagnosis that is under the autism umbrella. But I love Secret Life of a Black Aspie because it takes you to all sorts of different parts of American history, from like desegregation of schools to like the time of hippies, through an autistic perspective, which I really value.
And I love that you pointed to, a diversity of perspectives. I think that's so important. And I am quite sure that there must be people who are reading your book thinking, I also have a story that I want to tell. What would you say to them? How would you advise other disabled people, especially autistic people, who are saying, I want to share my story and make my mark, but I'm not really sure how to do that?
I think you absolutely should do it, and do it by connecting with other disabled folks. I think it's really hard to find allies sometimes in industries that are not predominantly disabled. But if you reach out to people like me, or if you reach out to people like Emily, we maybe already have found some allies in the publishing world, or in different communities that we know are hopefully safe people, who know more about how to publish books and tell stories than we do. So I would say reach out to the people who have already done it and ask them for advice, ask them for any connections they have. And also just tell your story, because your story will truly help so many more people than you know that it will help.
I think that's so true on both counts. First of all, not being afraid to reach out and connect, but also internally understanding that, yes, your story is important, and yes, your story has a place.
And so valuable. We so often think like, oh, who am I to take up center stage in a play? Who am I to be the main character? Who am I to write a book and tell a story? But like, we love stories about the human experience, and you are a human. You have had experiences, right? That's all you need. Like, if you are all of us in the world, we are all the same. We're all just living, breathing people. And if you are a living, breathing person, then your story deserves to be told, and your story deserves center stage just as much as anyone else's. That's all there is to it. Sorry.
You are a human and you have experiences. I could not have said that better myself. And, that makes me think, you mentioned the word allies, and, I think that's a very deeply human thing, to be able to support one another, right? And having read your book, what are some of the things that people can do now that they've read your book, now that they're familiar with your story? Yeah. How can people continue to embrace that humanity and say, I'm going to be a strong ally. I'm going to do the work to be an ally?
I think the biggest thing you can do is always looking around you at who is part of the discussions you're at, who's working at the company you're working at, who is leading initiatives, and ask, hey, excuse me, why are there no disabled people at this table? Oh, excuse me, why are there no trans folks at this table? You know, I think that that's something you can do. I think another really huge thing that you can do is, let's say there's a movie that comes out about disability, or a play or a book that comes out about disability, or any group really, is saying, okay, who is profiting from this story? Who is benefiting from this story? And is it actually the community that is being used for this story? I think so often I see stories about disability, movies, TV shows about disability, where it almost feels like the disabled community is being used, because all of the people who are profiting from the story, all of the people who are deciding what goes into the story or how to represent the disabled community, they are not disabled themselves. And when you try to figure out, okay, how is this helping the disability community? It's really hard to find out how. So I would say, before supporting a movie, a TV show, a book, or a play, if it is about a specific community, if a specific community is truly at the core of that story, figure out, okay, how is this benefiting them? Who is profiting from this? And try to really uplift. We don't need to cancel necessarily any stories that aren't by that community, but seek out the stories that are written from within the community, seek out the stories that are benefiting a certain community, and really uplift those at least as much as you uplift the stories that are written by non-disabled folks about disability.
I think you point to something so important, which is really diving into whether something is authentic, right? Whether something really is written with the best interests of a community, by the community, for the community. And I just love that you point that out. And authenticity is something that runs so deeply throughout your book. And I think there's a million moments where you come across as your truest self. And I admire that so much about it. My question for you, though, is looking back on the whole of the book and everything that you expressed, and, you know, all that you lay bare for everyone. What is one piece of wisdom that you want readers to continue to carry with them after reading the book? If they could only carry one thing with them, what would that be? Yeah,
I think the one thing I wish everyone took from my book moving forward is that you are enough. I think whether it's a disabled person reading my book, whether it's someone non-disabled reading my book, whether it is, you know, I think so many of the world's problems just come from people feeling hurt inside themselves, feeling that they are not enough, feeling like they don't have enough. And I think if everyone can just know you truly are enough, you are so valuable, you are enough, then we would all be so much kinder to each other, and there would be so much less hurt in the world. And knowing that also everyone else is enough, that that disabled people are so enough, even if you don't understand someone's disability or understand how they exist in the world, that's okay. You can trust that they are human, they are enough. So I think everyone should just feel valued and worthy and enough.
I think that is such a beautiful takeaway, and I cannot believe how time has flown.
I know.
But we have a whole bunch of questions that came, and I'll tell you, I'm happy to do the asking of the questions. I think, you know, a lot of them are geared towards you, and I'd love to hear your insights. I'm happy to weigh in wherever you might want me to. But we were just talking about authenticity and about being enough. And yet we have a question that came in that said, I feel like it's become common for major networks to tokenize characters with disabilities. So how can Hollywood be more sensitive and simultaneously more realistic about these narratives?
Yeah, I think something that is so important that gets overlooked so much is we always think about hiring disabled actors to play disabled roles now. It's not the norm still. When I wrote the book, I don't know how the statistic has changed over quarantine, over COVID, but when I wrote the book, 95% of disabled characters were being played by non-disabled actors, according to the Ruderman Family Foundation. But I feel like when we think about inclusion, we really only think about the actors usually. And the best thing we can do to push Hollywood forward, to make representation even better, is by expanding our understanding of inclusion and saying, okay, but can we also have disabled producers? Can we have people on our writing team with disabilities? Can we have disabled costume designers? And having disabled inclusion, having inclusion of whatever kind, all throughout the process, through every layer of the process, will make our stories that much more authentic, that much more sexy and nuanced and powerful.
And related to that, we actually got a question from Maya, who wants to know a little bit about your particular experiences with being center stage. So can you just talk a little bit about becoming an actor and about your acting experiences, especially in Seattle?
Yeah. So I actually had a really hard time in Seattle in some ways. I was so fortunate that I had a couple companies in Seattle that knew me and liked me and would hire me over and over again. Seattle Children's Theater, which is a professional union theater that performs theater for young audiences, and Seattle Opera, which is the big professional opera company in Seattle. So I was really lucky to have those companies hiring me. But even at those companies, I never was able to get a speaking role. I wasn't able to get a role that spoke or had lines. And so Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime was not only my first time getting to play a lead role, but it was my first time getting to play a speaking role. So it was really interesting. I think even getting to do Curious Incident, at that time when I was pushing people to audition autistic actors for that show, what I would hear back so frequently from both people within the theater community and not in the theater community were, I agree it would be awesome to have a disabled actor play the role, but this is just not a role that an autistic actor can play. This is a really big role with really big words. They lead the show. And so yes, ideally an autistic actor could play an autistic role, but this show it's just not possible. Or people not even understanding the value. It really stuck with me when people would say that it was a big show with big words. It was super frustrating to me. So I think, yeah, but now after getting to play Christopher Boone in Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, after getting really good reviews in the show, I hope that theater companies reevaluate who actually is capable of having speaking roles in theaters, who is actually capable of playing lead roles, that lead characters or ingenues don't always need to look a certain way to be able to play that role. We can have all sorts of different lead characters, and that sometimes having an unexpected leading actor can be so much more exciting and interesting for an audience and pull an audience in such a great way than just having another person who walks in the room and everyone instantly thinks, oh yeah, they're the lead. They're the ingenue.
That's actually the perfect transition to another question that came in. What's your favorite character trait about Christopher?
The process of auditioning for Christopher, from the time that I first started auditioning for the Broadway production, until the time that I actually ended up getting to play Christopher, gosh, was probably 3 years at least. So I feel like I was living with the character of Christopher kind of on standby for 3 years before finally getting to play Christopher at the theaters that I got to play Christopher at. So I love Christopher so much. I think my favorite thing about Christopher is how tenacious he is, and that just like so many disabled people, he realized, or maybe I don't even know if he thought about it this articulately or specifically. I think he just was go, go, go. But as an outsider looking at Christopher, so often as disabled people, we cannot get to the finish line playing by the rules that our non-disabled society has set forth. So he doesn't play by the rules. He just thinks, I'm at point A, I need to get to point B. What do I need to do to get there without hurting anyone or doing anything ethically wrong? Even if some of the things I'm doing along the way are not necessarily following the rules that the non-disabled society has put forth. So I really respect that in Christopher so much. And I think that that has informed how I feel the need to live my life as well, because we just can't get to the finish line playing by, not disabled folks just are never going to get to the finish line if we always play by the rules that have been put forth in the past.
You know, speaking of not playing by the rules or playing by our own rules, as it were, I think that relates really well to another question that came in. Yeah. Someone is wondering how your life experiences have affected your parenting style.
Yeah, that's such a good question. You know, as an autistic parent, it is so interesting to me the number of times people assume I cannot be a parent or are not a parent. Often, especially when I was a single dad, I would be at the playground with my kids. And, you know, because playgrounds can often be really loud, noisy places with a lot of stimulus, I'd be at the playground with sunglasses on and my headphones on and a hoodie on. And people would look at me thinking that I must just be a really interesting choice for a babysitter or an interesting choice for a nanny. They're like, why is he with these kids? Who chose this nanny for their kids? Sometimes kids would even walk up to, I'd be pushing my kids in a stroller, you know, with my headphones and hoodie on and my sunglasses. And I'd be pushing my kids in the stroller, and a parent might come up to me, come up to my kids, who were maybe at the time 2 and 4, and look at them and ask them, are you okay? Do you need help? Which is so bizarre that just because maybe you could tell that I was autistic, or you could tell something was different about me, you felt the need to approach my children and ask them if they needed help, because obviously I should not be pushing their stroller right now. But I think autistic people make such great parents. And the reason I think that is because, you know, kids so frequently feel misunderstood. I think when I think back on my childhood, I think so many people, when they think back on their childhood, there are times when kids just feel misunderstood. And as an autistic person, I relate to that so deeply and so viscerally. So I think it makes me a really great and understanding parent when communicating with my kids. As an autistic person, I'm also really sensory seeking. I need extra proprioceptive input. So I'm often flapping or rocking or spinning or trying just to move as much as I can to get that proprioceptive input. And kids love that too. So when my kids are jumping on the trampoline or rolling down a field, I am rolling down the field with them or jumping on the trampoline with them, not because I feel like I need to, because I'm a parent and it's what I probably should do, but because I genuinely enjoy it, which I think just makes my relationship with my kids so much better. And I think as an autistic adult who is also the parent of an autistic kid, it helps me advocate for my autistic kids better as well. I hope that answered the question. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it ties into another question that somebody had. They wanted to know how old you were when you learned about your autism diagnosis. And I'm interested too. I think that ties in very well to knowing more about yourself and your parenting style. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, that is such a good question. I think I have a really unique answer to that question too, which is that, you know, all through elementary, basically from the time I started elementary school, I knew something was different about me. Even though I never heard the word autism or had the word autism assigned to my knowledge on paper to me. I very quickly in elementary school started getting taken out of my classroom and sent to speech therapy, or sent to occupational therapy, or sent to special ed. And I was in special ed or speech therapy or occupational therapy all the way until the time I graduated from high school, all through high school. That whole time, though, I didn't know why I needed to do these things that all the other kids didn't do. I didn't know whether I was just bad or stupid or just not as smart as all the other kids, if there were just things they knew that I couldn't figure out. And I was just reading my IEP the other day with my wife, and it was so interesting because when I look at my IEP, an IEP, for those of you who don't know, is an individualized education plan. And it's basically anyone who's in special ed education in the United States has an IEP. But I was reading my IEP, and almost all of the accommodations listed in my IEP are for autism. Like they are all clearly what the accommodations that you would provide for someone who was autistic. But then in the reason for needing these accommodations, it said, it lists my eyesight, that I'm legally blind. It lists my vision as the reason, or as the diagnosis, I guess. So I just think it was really interesting, because why would my eyesight mean that I need speech therapy? Why would my eyesight mean I need occupational therapy? Like, this doesn't necessarily make sense. But so someone probably knew or assumed I was autistic way back when I was in school. I received all the special ed services that someone who was diagnosed autistic would have received from elementary school through high school. But I was never told I was autistic myself. I did not get that label told to me. Often even parents will come up to me and say, should I tell my kids they're autistic? At what age is it appropriate to tell my kids that they're autistic, or should I never tell my kids they're autistic? And so I never really was told that by my school or by my teachers or by my mom. But when I graduated from school and was in college, I started going to therapy, and my therapist assigned me to someone else, and they assigned me to someone else. And I ended up at the University of Washington Adult Autism Clinic. And that's when I received my first diagnosis, to my knowledge, to my face, that I was autistic, was when I was probably 21 or so.
Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, it's interesting because it shows that autism is not a monolith, and that everybody experiences diagnoses in a different way. Everybody experiences how they learn about themselves and what being autistic means to them in a very different way. Yeah. So I really appreciate that. And I can't believe we have honestly just time for one more question to wrap up. I'm going to sneak in too. I'm going to ask, first of all, one of the questions that we got from the Q&A is, what's an easy change that, you know, organizations can make to be more accommodating for all folks? And as we are thinking about the changes that we can make and the changes that we can advocate for, I also want to know what's next for you.
Yeah, I would say the biggest change that we can make to accommodate people with disabilities. It's so hard because the disability community is so diverse, right? And there are so many every person in the disability community has different accommodations that they'll need. So if I say that one thing moving forward that we should do is always ask people what they need, ask people what they can do, and ask people what they can't do. And then believe people when they give you the answers to all three of those questions. Believe people when they tell you what they need. Believe people when they tell you what they can do. And believe people when they tell you what they can't do. and always ask rather than assume. It would be silly for me to try to make assumptions about what accommodations Emily might need, because I don't know what accommodations Emily might need. I would maybe make a huge long list of accommodations, and maybe half of them are helpful, half of them aren't. And then there are a bunch of accommodations that I missed. It's such a waste of my brain energy and my money to try to like assume what accommodations Emily needs. But if I just ask Emily what accommodations she needs, then I get a really simple answer, and it makes my job so much easier. So it's just asking people and then believing people when they tell you, I would say. And then what's next for me is, I don't know, I am hoping that that people buy Fearlessly Different, and a great companion for Fearlessly Different too is Demystifying Disability, Emily's book. So buy Fearlessly Different, buy Demystifying Disability as a companion to the book. Buy them both, buy a couple of copies of both of them so you can gift them to people. And then I'm hoping people buy the book, and that then I can start doing more speaking engagements and things like that, rather than continuing working at minimum wage jobs and things. That's my hope for a transition there.
Mickey, you are awesome. I loved having this conversation with you. Everybody, please go buy his book if you haven't already. And thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both, Mickey and Emily. What a wonderful, interesting discussion. This is Eileen again from Politics and Prose. And Mickey, might I say, you are so joyful and positive. Even before the question about being a parent, I wanted to say, man, those kids are lucky to have a father like you. And I really mean that. So yeah, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming. What a wonderful discussion. I'd like to thank Mickey Rowe and Emily Ladau for being with us tonight, and also thank our wonderful audience at Politics and Prose. Your patronage is what enables us to bring you programming like this, and we cannot continue to host these types of events without the book sales to support them. So please go to the chat, order the 2 books. They're fabulous companion books. I'm going to do it, and I think we'll all learn a lot. And in times like these, a joyous book is what we need. Please support Mickey Rowe and Politics and Prose by using the link in the chat to purchase Fearlessly Different. Check our website for the most current updated event listings, as we have a great list to choose from, and please come back. We do hope to see you all here again, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you again, Mickey and Emily. Read well, and everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.